I always like to listen to Meg talk because she understands that in order for science to have impact, there needs to be communication, follow-up communication. They can lay out all the facts and figures, but then there needs to be a conversation after it about what you actually are going to do with it. She's great at being part of those conversations. So next, before our break, one more. Cole Doolittle with the Marquette University, and working at the HJA Experimental Forest on the mighty Willamette National Forest. Exploring how microclimates and biotic factors influence post-fire forest plant communities. Please help me welcome Cole Doolittle.
Okay, yeah, my name is Cole, and I'm a graduate student at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so it's a pleasure to be out here. I'm usually just out here in the summer, so everyone says it rains all the time. Now I understand. It does rain all the time. Before I get started, I do want to talk and thank all of the people that make ideas and projects like this possible. All of these ideas were workshopped and implemented by the LTER disturbance group at the Andrews, Dave, Meg, Joe, Andres, and Catalina. I'd like to thank my lab mates, a couple of amazing undergraduates that I worked with, Megan and Ariana, and the field crews and funding that make work like this possible. So for the next 20 minutes, I'd like to focus on this central idea. What can wildfire teach us about the fundamental drivers of biodiversity? This includes what we can learn from the biotic drivers of biodiversity, such as species interactions, as well as the abiotic drivers of biodiversity, resource availability, climate, etc. But before I go into it, a quick roadmap. First, I'll be giving a history background and some information on the study site of this work. Then I'll jump into the biotic drivers of biodiversity and what we're learning from understory responses to fire. And then we'll swap over and talk about post-fire microclimates and what we hope to learn in the future. So if you were to hop on Highway 126 outside of Eugene and head up into the Willamette National Forest, you would reach the HJ Andrews Experimental Forest LTER. This is an NSF-funded long-term ecological research station that was established in 1948. There's a map of it there on the right. It's 6,400 hectares and covers nearly 1,000 meters in elevation. One hallmark advantage of the Andrews is the availability of long-term data sets, including a forest inventory stand system, the reference stand system, which is a network of quarter-hectare plots that were established in the 70s. This figure on the right is from one of the original publications on the reference stand system that characterizes plots, these reference stands, with moisture on the x-axis and temperature on the y-axis. So these plots cover a variety of different functional habitats and tree environments that are representative of the Cascade Range. In 2020, as I'm sure you're aware, the Holiday Farm fire ignited just a few miles south of the Andrews, and it eventually would burn roughly 400 acres of the Andrews at a mixed severity. So these are some photos from the fire crews fighting the fire in the southwestern corner of the experimental watershed. Here's another map of the Andrews, and if I zoom in, I can overlay the remote sense burn severity map so you can get an idea of, we're just down in this bottom southwestern corner of the HJ Andrews. The HJ Andrews proper burned at a low to mixed severity with isolated patches of higher basal area mortality. Thankfully, for those of us interested in fire effects, we also have the Hagen Research Natural Area, which is right nearby, where the fire burned at a higher basal area mortality more thoroughly, which helps us characterize that high severity end. This is what our mid to low severity sites look like. It's primarily an understory burn that consumes the duff layer in many locations and the top layer of soil, leaving exposed roots and scree behind. So to explore how wildfires are altering understory communities, we set this goal of connecting these forest inventory plots to understory surveys that'll help us explore how the abiotic factors affecting the understory change and how the biotic factors that are affecting the understory change following fire. The advantages of this approach is we gain a more complete picture of the overstory, understory, and abiotic factors influencing fire regeneration, and we can leverage these long-term plots in a way that may have only been a distant possibility in the mind of the researchers that established them 50 years ago. So in 2021, just months after the fire, I began establishing a network of 80 meter squared plots along a fire severity gradient. In these plots, all individual plants are identified, tagged, and measured through successive years. These plots are also entirely co-located with those long-term data sets, as I mentioned, and they're paired with either a Douglas fir or Western hemlock adult, which are the dominant species in these watersheds, and allow us to characterize the negative pairwise biotic feedbacks to get at those biotic factors influencing biodiversity. Here's what the typical study site looks like. That gray circle there is the forest inventory plot, and in those plots I identify Douglas fir or Western hemlock adults and establish these meter squared plots right along the base, within 3 meters of the base of these trees. And here is what these plots look like. Classic meter squared plots in burned areas. On the left there is an unburned plot, the understory of the Northwest. And then on the right there is 1 year after the burn and 2 years after the burn, which is where we currently are at. We just finished our second survey this past summer. Because I just have one interval of data, I don't have a ton of work to share. But I am excited to talk about some of the work that undergraduates that I've been working with have done. So here are survival rates for the two dominant seedling species. We have Western hemlock on the left and Douglas fir on the right. And as we increase in basal area mortality, our proxy for fire severity, we don't see any effect of on the survival of Douglas fir, but we do see this strong effect on the survival of Western hemlock, which have an extremely low survival probability at high severity burn sites. During this time is when the infamous 2021 heat dome occurred, which provided a unique opportunity for an REU. I was working with Megan to explore the seedling abundances in plots we were establishing, and she found that while we were finding a lot of Western hemlock seedlings before the heat dome, we found very few after. And so that may be a reason why we're seeing a decrease in Western hemlock abundances, but I also think that's probably due to life history. And this past year, another undergraduate student I worked with, Ariana, was investigating how ceanothus was regenerating and surviving after fire. This is a fire obligate nitrogen fixing species that's of particular interest for its role in the nutrient cycle. And she found that ceanothus was surviving or performing better in higher severity burn sites. So all of this, including the understory herbaceous surveys, just some background demographic information. I'm not going to take the time to go into all of the herbaceous data we have, besides to say that the trends that we're seeing follow the typical patterns of post-fire understories in these west side forests. Some of the fireweed is already taller than I am. We did see an increase in herbaceous richness from this first two surveys, but no effect of fire severity. So beyond these demographics, we hope to use these plots to understand how biotic interactions maintaining biodiversity change after fire. Specifically, we measure a biotically mediated limitation to growth and survival and population growth called conspecific density dependence, or CDD. CDD describes a relationship where demographic and population growth rates for a species is mediated by the density of conspecifics nearby. So this advantages rare species, which are rarely near a conspecific, and this sets the carrying capacity for common, densely aggregated species. And it's most influential at early life on survival in early life stages, such as those in a post-fire environment. So here's a graphical depiction of this biotic process. As you increase conspecific density, you decrease the likelihood that an individual will survive. What this does through time is it stabilizes populations and allows multiple populations with equivalent fitness to survive together in a local environment. We know that this predicts species richness both globally and locally, and we know that it varies along abiotic gradients. What we don't know is how this process operates in burned environments. But we think that as we increase burn severity, we decrease the role of CDD in the environment. This is primarily driven by natural enemies, species-specific natural enemies like pathogens and herbivores that aggregate around densely located individuals. And so as the fire comes through, we think we probably neutralize this negative effect, but we don't know. And so that's what we're looking at today. So we just have this one interval of data, but I'm going to show you these negative pairwise feedback charts. So on the bottom there is the paired adult species that's right next to the plot. And I'm going to be plotting the survival probability for these two species, western hemlock and Douglas fir. For each of them, we expect that they perform worse under a conspecific adult and better under a heterospecific adult. So the Dougs should do worse under Doug adults, and the hemlocks should do worse under hemlock adults. And in low severity fires with this one interval of data, we don't find that interaction. Instead, we find seedlings are generally less or are underperforming under a western hemlock adult, but there's no influence of conspecific or heterospecific communities. Same thing for high severities. We would expect to see the same type of feedback, maybe a bit lower survival with the fire severity, or we expect to see that these interactions disappear, and instead we don't see an effect of the conspecific or heterospecific. And indeed, that's what we see. We just see that seedlings generally perform worse under western hemlocks, no interaction term. So there's no significant feedbacks. These classic biotic feedbacks that are present in our forests seem to be disappearing in burned environments. And seedlings are just generally less likely to survive under a hemlock. Why that may be, I'm not quite sure, but I'm interested in figuring that out. So we do find low survival of hemlock seedlings relative to Douglas fir, which correlates with fire severity. And we found high mortality of those seedlings after the heat dome event in 2021. Both seedlings seem to not do well under western hemlock adults, but there's no evidence that there are biotic feedbacks, negative CDD, influencing the survival of these seedlings at these very early cereal stages. So next, we're going to keep this going, right? We're going to continue to resurvey these plots every year, and we're going to develop some high-resolution fire severity and community density metrics. And we're interested in quantifying more of these abiotic processes that may be influencing the biotic factors, including light availability, soil chemistry, and the soil microbiome, as well as some of the microclimatic factors that I'll talk about in a second. So while we've spent the first part of this talk talking about the biotic drivers, I want to swap over and talk about the abiotic drivers, the other half of the coin, particularly microclimates, or site-specific temperature and humidity regimes that are moderated from macroclimatic extremes, the protected understory of the forest where the macroclimatic extremes are mediated. We know that microclimates are important for influencing the physiology, behavior, and stress of organisms, as well as defining climate refugia. And we know that microclimates are important in many ecosystem functions, including carbon storage and sequestration. What we don't know is how residual forest structures influence the evolution of microclimates after a fire, and how those resulting microclimates feed back to influence the understory. And so we're trying to connect multiple data sources to get a complete picture of the fire effects, the microclimate, the macroclimate, using those long-term forest inventory plots and the understory surveys to explore the long-term evolution of microclimate and then translate that microclimate to the fire environment. And again, we're leveraging this long-term data in a new way, and we have this mixed severity fire with a variety of topographic positions that allows us to thoroughly answer this question. So we've established these microclimate arrays in 2022, just this past summer at the Andrews, and we're measuring the above ground temperature and relative humidity, as well as the surface temperature and moisture just below the surface. These plots are split between young and old forests, and they're also located with those long-term inventory data sets. They're also paired with the understory plots, so we can look at microclimates as mediators of the biotic interactions between understory plants. So I don't have much to show here besides some of the low resolution preliminary data that we collected from 2021 to 2022, which shows that high severity sites are consistently more variable in daily temperature. We need more time, and we need to go back out and collect this high resolution data that we've put out this past summer. But we're interested in seeing if these effects translate to both the residual structure of the forest and the future condition of the understory. So we'll keep tracking these microclimates through time to follow the evolution of the buffering capacity and estimate how variable post-fire microclimates are. And then we're hoping to compare these microclimates between young and old forests and answer this question, to try to get at this question, how are the fundamental drivers of biodiversity and the factors influencing plants in our forests changing in burned environments? So far, we're finding that those biotic interactions, such as CDD, seem to be neutralizing or weakening in burned environments, and abiotic factors may be essential for determining the understory composition and the existence of refugia after a fire. And with that, I would invite you to stay tuned for more. Hopefully, I'll get to talk and share more as we continue to learn about these forests. So thank you. I'd also be happy to answer any questions if somebody has one. Yeah.
First, I wanted to applaud you for tagging seedlings and understory vegetation. That's really interesting. And I was wondering if you might be able to share your concept-specific density dependence question with just your seedling data. I realize that it wasn't designed that way, but that's a place where you might have a lot of biotic interactions and that things. I don't know what it looks like, but that might be something that you might look at.
Yeah, the question was whether we could tackle conspecific density dependence with just the seedling data, and I think yes, we will try to do that. The study was designed to take into account the outsized effect of the nearby adult, but we will definitely look at the seedling on seedling competition type effects as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, back there.
I was just wondering how you kind of set up these two stages. Is it is it the abiotic or the biotic? And I'm wondering, based on what you're kind of believing it right, you're suggesting that CDD might be breaking down post-fire. But I'm wondering if it's just that microclimatic
Yeah, so the question is CDD really breaking down, or is it just a longer time scale? Is it operating on a longer time scale? And I think our prediction is that CDD, this biotic process, may neutralize or weaken in burn environments, and then over time regenerates as we get more of the natural enemies, those fungal pathogens and herbivores, returning to the burned area as conspecific densities increase and competitive interactions become more important to determining individual success. So yes, I think what we're finding generally is that those abiotic factors are way more important after a fire, and the biotic factors will come back over time. Thank you.